has their name identified. However, if you're going to speak or ask questions, I would just ask that you identify yourself. Just state your name before you speak. Unfortunately, probably should do that every time in order for the court reporter to make an appropriate record and to record testimony accurately. I think that Denton is the only member of the public that is participating. So I'll just say that there's a couple ways that the public can participate in this hearing. One is to simply make a statement at the end of the applicant's testimony for or against the use that is being proposed tonight. Or the second way is to ask to be granted something called standing. And if an individual has standing, they would need to show that they have a direct, substantial, and immediate interest in what's going on tonight and what's being requested. For example, a neighboring property owner would have automatic standing. I'm presuming, but I'll ask the question, that there are no members of the public who would wish to participate in a way that they would have standing. If anybody would like to participate that way, I'll give you a few seconds to unmute and say you want to participate that way. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. And I just want to state that we're here tonight because this is a use that's permitted under the zoning ordinance by conditional use approval. So section 402.7 of the zoning ordinance says that multifamily development is a use permitted in this particular zoning district, which is the medium density or R2 zoning district, by conditional use approval. So this is a process called conditional use that has to go before Borough Council as opposed to going before the zoning hearing board. And just for Borough Council's reference, the conditional use standards are found in the ordinance as well. And basically the standards are that the use is in harmony with the purposes of the ordinance and that the use that's being proposed will not adversely affect health, safety, and welfare of the community and the neighborhood. All right, so with that being said, I'm just going to go through some exhibits that the borough would want to enter into the record. So the first exhibit is the actual conditional use application that was filed with the borough. Exhibit number 2 is the hearing notice for tonight's hearing. Exhibit 3 is a proof of publication, which shows that the notice was published in the Reading Eagle on December 29th, 2020 and January 4th, 2021. Exhibit 4 is an affidavit of posting, which says that Robert Widener, street supervisor of the borough, posted the notice at the Borough Hall on January 4th, 2021. Exhibit 5 is another affidavit of posting, which says that, again, Bobby Widener posted the notice on January 4th, 2021. This one was posted at the property 109 East Locust Street, Fleetwood. Exhibit number 6 is an affidavit of mailing, which indicates that my office mailed out the notice to the appropriate parties. Some were mailed out December 27th and some were mailed out December 28th, 2020. Exhibit 7 is a zoning decision regarding this property, which I think was back in December 2020. and mailed out January 5th, 2021, wherein the applicant was granted a number of requests in the nature of variance relief regarding the development of the property. We'll mark by reference, the Fleetwood zoning ordinance of 1 as amended as the next exhibit, and Mr. Cuck will also have some exhibits. So I'm sure there aren't any objections to the exhibits being entered into the record, Mr. Cuck?
None, Mr. George.
Okay, so they're so entered. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Mark Cuck.
Thank you, Mr. George. Ladies and gentlemen, members of council, Mr. Young, Mark Cuck here on behalf of the applicant Fitz Realty Company, LLC. Kelly, I'll go ahead and enter my appearance. I am with the firm of Cuck & Cuck, 217 North 6th Street, Reading, PA, 19603. Once again, I want to thank everybody. This is quite an unusual format, but becoming more normal all the time. If at any time anybody cannot hear me, please just stop me. We've come to the understanding that these Zoom hearings are anything but normal, so I'll be happy to try to start over or try to work with Mr. Young in directing your attention to some of the exhibits that we already have in the system for you this evening. So the first thing I want to do after that brief introduction is apologize. Mike Fitzgerald is the principal in Fitz Realty Company. Mr. Fitzgerald apologizes. He is literally in the air right now. When we originally scheduled this hearing, he was available by Zoom. The airline shifted his flight, and he was unable to change it in order to get back into Pennsylvania in time. So number one, I want to apologize for that. Secondly, I have with me a representative of Watkins Architects by the name of Jeff Bean. He'll be testifying to some of the specifics as we work our way through this hearing this evening. I will try to be brief. I know you have a full meeting after this. And so with that being said, I'd like to direct your attention to this property is known as 109 East Locust Street. It sits between East Locust Street and the Foundry Alley. It is what everybody probably recalls as the Fleetwood Seventh-day Adventist Church. Fitz Realty Company acquired this property in February of 2020 and started the process of evaluating what this potential building could be used for. And the conclusion was that multifamily apartments was the best fit for this particular building. We sit on approximately 0.13 acres. It's an existing structure on an existing parking lot, and we're going to walk you through what we're proposing to do and why we think this use fits you. But the important thing to know is that this is essentially a redevelopment of a building that, in Mr. Fitzgerald's opinion, is at this point really has no other available use in the borough, and this will be a good.
I'm sorry, this is Chris Young. Just note. We are recording this on Zoom for borough purposes. We'll forward this to you and the court reporter, but I didn't know if you wanted to ask if anybody else was recording. Again, being unique on Zoom, we do this now on borough council meetings.
Understood. Is anybody else recording this particular proceeding? Sounds like none. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Young. So with respect to go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Who is it?
This is Colin Boyer. I am recording.
Okay. No problem. Thank you, Mr. Boyer.
Council member. Yes.
So let me just get my bearings here. So just to kind of give you a little bit of the history of this particular situation, when Mr. Fitzgerald acquired the property in Fitz Realty Company, one of the things we did was started to investigate a potential to redevelop, I guess is the best way to put it, this particular property. He did approach Borough Council. I believe it was sometime back in August or September and had requested a waiver of any land development because essentially there wasn't any new development taking place. After that process, we filed a zoning permit application with Barry Isett. Barry Isett, through Mr. Weaver, identified a number of dimensional variances. These are not use variances, as you know, but dimensional variances with respect to the building and the parking that exist due to the nature of the building as it currently sits on the property. On or about December 8th, we conducted a zoning hearing with your Borough Zoning Hearing Board. And the Zoning Hearing Board essentially granted all of the relief that we were requesting from the board. And as Mr. George indicated, that Zoning Hearing Board decision is part of your hearing materials at, I guess it's number 7. So applicant number 7. Is that right, Mr. George?
That is correct.
Thank you. So that being said, we now have to come before Borough Council, which is the reason for this particular hearing, to have a conditional use hearing to request your approval to allow these multifamily apartments and the redevelopment of this property. So with that being said, are there any questions from members of council?
It's Pete. I believe there's 3 units going in.
That's correct, Mr. Merkel.
And I grew up about 60 feet from that church. As I recall, there's plenty of parking in back for 3 units.
There's actually 9 spaces, Mr. Merkel, and what happened at the zoning hearing board is we were proposing to retain the 9 spaces. Our parking calculation for 3 units is 2 spaces per unit, which would be a total of 6 spaces. Your zoning officer's determination is that no handicap space is required at this location. And so when we went to the zoning hearing board suggested to us that they would prefer to see us modify the parking, which I will show you shortly. And they liked that modified angled 45-degree parking towards the east better than the 9 spaces that were currently existing on the parking lot to the rear at the Foundry Alley. So we're actually proposing, you're welcome. We're actually proposing 6 angled spaces, which appears to flow and work much better than what we were originally starting with. That was at the request of your board. Zoning hearing board, I should be clear. So unless anybody has any other questions, we'll jump right into Mr. Jeff Bean as our witness this evening. Kelly, can we go ahead and swear Mr. Bean?
I guess you have to unmute.
Is Jeff muted?
I'm not muted.
Kelly's
Just
muted.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. All right, Mr. Bean, you've now been sworn. Are you familiar with this property at 109 East Locust Street?
I am, yes.
And are you a registered architect?
I am, yes.
And are you employed by Watkins Architects?
Yes.
And you are authorized by the owner, Fitz Realty Company, LLC, to testify here this evening. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. So at this point, Mr. Young has on the screen the deed for the property. I would just ask Mr. George and the rest of the Borough Council just to take judicial notice that this is the actual deed to the property. As of the last time, Mr. George, that I had looked at the recording information, it still wasn't showing up in the Recorder of Deeds office. There's a pretty bad lag right now. So I will represent to the board, this is in fact the deed into Fitz Realty Company, LLC. And Mr. George, do we want to mark sequentially? I would make that Exhibit 9 or whatever you'd like to do.
That's fine. Why don't we go with Exhibit 9? And I think we can take notice of that deed as you request.
Thank you. All right. So, Mr. Bean, are you familiar with the property in question being approximately 0.13 acres?
Correct. Yes, I am.
And you understand that it's in the R2 district. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Now, Mr. Young, if you could please pull up pages 33. We'll start with page 33. And that'll be the 3 pages of the plans.
I can reduce it so
It's tough to see, isn't it?
I know, right. So it's either if anybody would like to zoom in, let me know. But all council already has this by email as well.
Excellent. All right. So, Mr. Bean, what you're looking at, Mr. George, we're going to call that exhibit number 10 for purposes of identification, if that's okay.
That's fine.
And that's going to consist of the 3 pages Mr. Young has up, which is 33, 34, and 35. And if I'm going too fast at any point, somebody please just yell at me. So, Mr. Bean, are you familiar with these plans? Were they prepared by Watkins Architects?
Yes, they are prepared by our office.
And so they consist of 3 pages. And just going directly to Mr. Merkel's question right at the gate, if you look at the first page, which is 33, you were able to get over to me the revised parking layout to the rear of the building. Is that right?
Correct. This is the updated plan based on the zoning hearing board's request or decision with the submission to slightly alter the parking in order to show 6 angled parking spaces with sort of a common driveway coming in. So that's what this plan depicts. It depicts the updated plan, which we were able to put together based on the zoning hearing.
And I just wanted to point that right out because Mr. Merkel had raised that question out of the gate. So essentially, Mr. Fitzgerald and Watkins took a look at this property, this 109 East Locust Street property, and did you reach the conclusion that it really was not usable as a church any longer?
Correct. There was a lot of issues, but an apartment building really seemed to be the best fit all around.
And when you first did your analysis, were you originally thinking 4 units might be the best fit here?
We were.
And did you, go ahead.
But the parking and just overall layout, accessibility, some other things with the property, the decision was made to scale it back to 3, which really, I think, met more of the zoning requirements and sort of worked better for the overall property.
So understanding that this property is pretty much maximized at this point, and by that I mean the building, is it pretty much built out to the edges of the property?
Pretty much. There's maybe 4 or 5 feet on each side to the left or right, and as far forward as it can come as well. So I think it is absolutely maxed out. There'd be no way of increasing the building.
And then the balance of the towards the Foundry Alley, essentially that is all parking, right?
That is all asphalt pavement right now, and it was 9 parking spaces originally.
And I'm sorry, was somebody trying to say something? I'm not sure. Doesn't sound like it. Okay, we'll keep moving. So
and with the 9 parking spaces, they were basically 3 deep by 3 wide. So that's why I think the zoning hearing board preferred this method where you don't have cars double parked in there where others can't get out without somebody backing out. So.
Right. And so based on the recommendation or based on the relief obtained from the zoning here, we're able to redesign that parking area to the rear as you're showing it on exhibit page 1. Is that right?
That is correct. And just to clarify, we did not make any changes to any asphalt. It's really only line painting in order to accommodate the parking changes that were proposed.
So you touched a little bit on the fact that based on your analysis of the building and how it's essentially constructed, there's really only one realistic use, and that's this multi-unit apartment use. Is that right?
That's our opinion, yes.
Okay. And then as we move ahead, we talked about the parking. We have the new parking plan. So, Mr. Young.
The diagram that we were just looking at on the screen. The only question I have is about lighting. Can anybody speak to how that parking lot is going to be lit and if those lights will be hooded in some way as not to disturb neighboring residents?
Excellent question, Your Honor. The board had requested, and this is the zoning hearing board had requested that we light the property in accordance with your ordinance, and we've agreed to do that. So I believe Fitz Realty Company will work with the borough and the code officers to do whatever is necessary there.
Okay, because we have some other properties and perhaps our zoning doesn't cover this very well, and I don't know, but the lights really need to be addressed, and they do need to be hooded so as not to be a disturbance. So
I think that is duly noted. We'll make a point of that. And Mr. Bean, if you can make a note of that as well. Currently, the only lighting I'm aware of is there's a single light at the front of the building, a single light at the rear of the building. That's what I know to be.
thank you for addressing that.
Correct. And we can, as part of this, as part of like the building permit, create a lighting plan that would show the foot candles and note the type of light which can be hooded or shielded to prevent excessive light spillover. But we can pick ones and actually have calculations performed to show the foot candles on the parking lot.
Okay.
Which I think is what the zoning ordinance would require, but we would plan to do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so, Mr. Bean, your understanding is there are no exterior changes to the building or the property. The building's going to look the same. Is that right?
Correct. We're going to repair it. There was, some fire damage. We're going to replace some windows in kind. So basically in the old things, in order to meet egress requirements, energy efficiency, things like that. But beyond that, beyond replacing windows in the existing openings and some, cosmetic repairs, there is no other major changes proposed to the building at all.
And so the other caveat to that is obviously the lighting the mayor just spoke about and the restriping of the paving in the rear of the property, right?
Correct.
All right. So, Mr. Young, if you could move to the second page of exhibit number 10, please. And Mr. Bean, then this is, I believe, how would you explain this building? Is this like a bi-level building essentially?
Yeah, it's a two-level building. One is really more of a basement level, but when you come in on the back from the parking lot, it's sort of a split-level building where you actually enter at like a halfway landing height. So to the right of your screen here, you'll see that the stairs that are, and I'm on the right-hand side, there's stairs that go down and there's stairs that go up. So you come in on that landing, which is like a split level. So if you go down to the lower level, which is halfway in the ground. It's considered, we're calling it a basement, but it's, it's halfway in the ground, essentially. So we do have we do have windows for this unit.
And what we're looking at here on page 2 then is that's apartment number 3, right? That's the whole downstairs basement, if you will?
Correct. The basement level has a single apartment unit to it, which has 2 bedrooms.
And then, Mr. Young, if you would move to the next page, please. And then, Mr. Bean, while he's getting there, this would then be the quote-unquote first floor plan, is right? This would be units number 1 and 2?
It would be the first floor or what we could consider the upper level.
Right.
So this one has stairs entering from the front and the back, and there's an apartment towards the front and there's an apartment towards the back of the property, sort of split right down the middle. Okay, and obviously as you, the plan here is to gut the interior of the building, is that right? Yeah, it's actually the upper level is fairly open to begin with as a church, and the rear was a social area, so they were pretty much open, but we are going to gut them and completely renovate the entire building, build new walls, etc., but completely clean up and restore the building to a really nice apartment units. Mr. Young, could you please bring up page 42? I think you're about on page 35 now. It'll be the interior design just above the church. There you go. Perfect. That's it. That's a view of the interior. Okay. So Mr. Bean, Mr. Young is bringing up, we're going to call this exhibit number 11.
And is this your one of Watkins' renditions of a concept of the interior of one of these units?
Correct. This is the concept of the unit that's in the current sanctuary.
And go ahead.
So it would be apartment number 1.
And so this just gives Borough Council a little bit of an idea of the kind of finishes that you're proposing, or Mr. Fitzgerald is proposing in this building. I think he's basically calling them luxury apartments. Is that right?
That's my understanding.
Okay. Another point is that I believe currently this property is exempt from taxation. Is your understanding that once Mr. Fitzgerald, if he's granted this ability or to construct this apartment, that'll become a taxable property? Is that right?
That would make sense to me, yes.
In your analysis of the building, I mean, does it lay out nicely and does it divide nicely into these 3 units?
It does. It was difficult when we were trying to get 4 units into it, but 3 really naturally fit the overall building.
Mr. Young, could you then move, I'm going to say down 1 picture, please? Perfect. And Mr. Bean, is this then, I'm sorry, let me back up. We'll call this exhibit number 12. And Mr. Bean, is this your understanding of the current Locust Street entrance into the church? Is that right?
That is correct.
And then Mr. Young, if you would move down 1 more picture, please. Thank you. And then we're going to call this exhibit 13. And Mr. Bean, is your understanding this is the rear view of the building looking from Foundry Alley?
Correct.
I do want to point out at this point, each of the units is 2 bedrooms, right?
Yes.
With respect to the exterior of the property, there is no new landscaping proposed. I believe there's a very slight flower garden of some sort up in the front of the property, but there's no other room for landscaping. Is that your understanding?
Correct. There's really no room for landscaping.
We've addressed the concept the mayor raised about lighting as required by the ordinance, and we'll address that by building permit as necessary. Is that right?
Correct.
Your understanding about the trash receptacles for this particular property, is it that they were using the typical trash totes that you can push around where they stored to the rear of this property?
Correct. And that's the intent here is we're thinking that, maybe 1 or 2 trash totes, similar to any other residential property would use, that would be stored sort of like as you're looking at the photo that's on your screen, it would be close to that, the blue door there, it'd be just in between there and that white looking, I think that's the air conditioner unit, but it would just sit back there.
All right.
I'm going to ask another question. Tammy Gore, Mayor. When you enter that blue door, do you have to go downstairs to the first apartment? Are we looking at somewhat of a split level sort of thing?
Yes, that's exactly correct. Sort of actually, as you look at that photo and you see the blue door, you can see there's like a maroon color at the base and then a yellowish vinyl siding above it. Yep. That transition between those 2 materials is the upper floor level.
Okay.
So you can see the doors kind of coming in halfway to there. So yes, you will go down like a half a flight of stairs to the lower level, and you go up a half a flight of stairs to the upper level.
Okay. And maybe any windows added to the back there for that, the second floor apartment?
No, the only thing that's going to be added is we need to add a what's called an egress window, which is from the lower level unit, which is for if there would be a fire, that it's sized properly for somebody to get out of a bedroom. So the window that you see on that view right now, we will add 1 more window sort of below that. That's going to be sort of tucked into the ground a little bit where it's like a window well, but to provide the code required egress window.
Okay. Thank you.
You're quite welcome, Your Honor. Thank you. Mr. Bean, will this multi-unit apartment need to be sprinklered?
Yes, it will.
We've already been through that, I believe, with the building code officials. Is that your understanding?
Correct. I believe, from my understanding is that our building permit plans were reviewed and tentatively approved pending all of these zoning hearing applications.
All of the approval processes, correct. So, and we have no issues whatsoever with codes, sprinklers. We're able to comply with all of that. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Now, based on your understanding of this building and the neighborhood, do you believe that this potential use of a multi-unit, 3-unit apartment for 2 bedrooms is a good use for this building?
Yeah, I think it's the best use for this area. I think it's a good fit.
And do you think this is appropriate for this particular site and this particular existing building and property?
Yes, I do.
Mr. Young, could you please find for me page 37 of the exhibits? Mr. Bean, finally, sorry, we're going to mark this. I think we're at exhibit 14, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
All right. Thank you, Mr. George. So, Mr. Bean, is it your understanding that Mr. Fitzgerald and Fitz Realty Company has investigated the availability of water and sewer for this project?
Yes, as evidenced by this letter you have up on the screen.
And so Mr. Young has penned a letter here dated October 11th or October 13th of 2020 indicating that there is sufficient water and sewer available for this project, obviously subject to the applicant's requirement to have to acquire those additional EDUs. Is that right?
Correct.
Mr. Bean, in your opinion, do you see that this project will have any detrimental impact on the surrounding properties?
No.
And do you think it'll have any negative impact on property values, or in fact, do you think it'll help to increase property values?
Well, I think that the fact that he wants to put in very nice units here, these are not going to be low income properties. I think it's going to be very similar to the level of properties that are around it. So I don't see any detrimental impact.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I would offer Mr. Bean for cross-examination at this point.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Cook. At this time, I'll open up the floor to any questions that any council members might have.
This is John Rothenberger. I have 2 questions. One is there handicap and or wheelchair access for any of these apartments?
There is not. And the way the codes are written, there is a threshold for when you are required to provide handicap accessibility to apartments. And so when we were at 4, we had to have a certain number that were handicapped. So that was the other sort of benefit to us going to 3, where we were under that threshold, because it was really essentially impossible to make this site handicap accessible by any means. It was the amount of rise between the grade and the upper level and the same to the lower level was so great with a huge ramp to be able to accommodate handicap accessibility. So it does not, but it's also not required to.
Okay. And the second question I had is regarding the steeple and the bell tower. Are they going to be maintained as is, or will they be removed?
They are not proposed to be removed. They are proposed to remain as is.
Yeah.
Any other?
And this, just a curiosity question. Do you have any idea of what type of rents will be proposed for these units?
I believe, Mark, I don't know if you want to answer that, but I believe it was in the zoning hearing testimony.
It is.
Of $1,500 a month, I believe.
Okay.
That's correct.
That sounds correct.
That would be considered a luxury, as you said, a luxury price point. So.
Yes, Your Honor, I can tell you that Mr. Fitzgerald represented to the zoning hearing board. That question came up, and that he was anticipating about $1,500 a month for these units.
For each unit, to be specific.
Per unit, correct, Mr. George.
So at the time, are there any other questions from council? Okay. Denton, I'll give you the opportunity since you're on board too, even though you didn't the conditional use hearing. Do you have any question statements that you want to make?
No question.
Okay. So at this time,
Mr. George, if I may, can I move the admission of my exhibits, please?
please do.
Thank you.
They're so admitted. At this time, what we'll do is we'll take a minute, and I'm not sure if council feels comfortable talking about this with Mr. Cuck here, and we can go off the record to do this. If not, if council has no concerns, we can discuss it freely now, but basically the option is to grant, to not grant with any conditions that council would want to potentially put on the use. But now's the time to talk about it. Like I said, we can do it in private, or we can do it on the record and render a decision right here and now.
And Mr. George, if it helps, I'm certainly willing to sign off too, whatever works.
Yeah, because, I mean, we have a meeting coming up next that we could obviously announce the decision in public at the meeting.
I don't want to hold the borough up. I mean, I'm perfectly comfortable with that. I'm sure I can talk to you tomorrow if that's the case.
Well, I'm assuming that the zoning board had all their questions answered. There were no reservations about the use and the plans for this building. And it seems like the due diligence has been done, if I'm reading everything correctly.
Your Honor, I can represent to you that the zoning hearing board, in my opinion, thought it was an interesting and a very well prepared project, and we addressed all of their concerns, which I can represent to you, consisted of the parking and the lighting. And Mr. Fitzgerald said, you know, hey, with respect to the parking, we'll be happy to revise that as you think it's a better fit, and the lighting as well. So those were the two concerns they raised. Oh, and just to be clear, the one other point to make is that indicate that he would remove the signage. He doesn't need a sign out there in the front. So if that makes any difference to anybody.
I can tell from the zoning decision, although Mr. Mancuso didn't put page numbers on it.
No, he didn't.
It's pretty lengthy. It's probably, if I'm going to guess, it's about 10 pages with small type. And it's, you know, there was a lot of testimony provided, and it appears that the zoning board gave this a lot of thought, and it was well reasoned and analyzed.
And that's what it appears. So, yeah, seems like everybody did due diligence, and I, for one, would welcome such an apartment development in that area.
So Andy, this is Ralph. Can we make the motion in this hearing, or do we need to make it in the second hearing?
Either one. We can make it on the record here if council is comfortable and no one has concerns. I would say just make it right here.
So since we have the quorum, I'll make the motion to proceed as recommended.
It's Pete, I'll second.
Oh, we got a second from Mr. Merkel. Do we have any further discussion?
Andy will take the vote.
Andy, will you take the vote then, please?
Sure. So we have a motion and a second, and what we'll do now is just do roll call. I'll go down the list, and everybody's going to have to unmute to give their vote. But we'll go with John. John, are you in favor?
John Rothenberger's in favor.
And is Mark's? Oh, that's Mark Cuck.
Yes, I'm in favor.
Oh, sorry, Mark. I thought you had to leave. Okay, so Mark Watkins, are you in favor?
It appears we lost Mark Watkins.
Oh, that is Mark Cuck. Okay, see.
Mark Watkins dropped off. He did a chat saying he had work commitment. He had to drop.
All right, I thought I saw that. So next we'll go to Pete Merkel.
Pete Merkel, yes, I approve.
Okay. Ralph Touch.
Yes, thank you.
Suzanne Touch.
Yes, thank you.
And Colin Boyer.
This is Colin Boyer. I am in favor. Yes, I approve.
Okay, so that motion carries. And
Right, you forgot Jimmy Meals.
Oh, I did. Jim Mills.
I'm a yes. I'm a
I
yes.
don't want to forget you, Jim.
Thanks.
My apologies, Jim.
Not a
So
problem.
that makes it even more unanimous. So what I'll do next is put together a written decision. We'll have it signed by council, and then we'll get that out in the mail.
I want to thank everybody for their time and effort this evening. Thank you very much. Have a good and safe one, and hopefully it's a short meeting.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Andy. That wants to do the council meeting. We're going to end this meeting and you have to re-sign on to the new Zoom meeting that was sent out. We're not continuing here.